weapon systems, or if you will, kill mechanisms which use, if you will, electromagnetic effects.
Okay.
And there are several ways to look at this. One, something like a radio frequency weapon or a laser type device, or an artillery piece that uses not chemical propulsion but electromagnetic propulsion. That is what some people have referred to as rail guns or whatever. Obviously, the electromagnetic spectrum is used in war in the form of electronic warfare, cyber war, etc. But my understanding is you want to focus on the former, that is weapon systems that emerge out of the use of electromagnetic forces or capabilities.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that everybody seems to be talking about in the service. So I want to get some granularity. I mean, who's really looking at those types of weapons? Are they in, what's the driver of that?
Right.
Okay.
The short answer is actually fairly straightforward at the moment, is the major player in the development of directed energy weapons is the U.S. Navy for two purposes. One is to develop an improved self-defense capacity against guided missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, whatever, for its surface warships. And in that regard, it's made some meaningful progress and is deploying an early version of what is known as a solid-state laser for close-in defense. This is not Star Wars. This is not some gigantic death ray, if you will, designed to shoot down long-range ballistic missiles. That technology is pretty well in abeyance. The last big effort in that regard was an Air Force program, which was the airborne laser, and that was canceled by the former Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, because of cost, military effectiveness, and other issues.
Okay.
The other dimension that the Navy is pressing to develop, and this is frankly, I think from a technological point of view, higher risk, and that is to use electromagnetic energy to propel, in essence, shells from a new kind of artillery piece, which doesn't use chemical energy, but uses electromagnetic energy to propel shells out to, let's say, 100 or 200 miles. This would replace, ultimately, the current naval guns that are on board our destroyers that would provide the Marine Corps with improved naval gunfire support. That technology is being pushed by the naval research community, and they hope to have a prototype operational, a test gun, if you will, on board, I believe, a barge sometime at the end of this decade. But that effort is likely to take some time to emerge, and obviously, like any new technology, the engine here is how much money do you put into it?
Right.
And in a world of austerity, budgetary austerity, something new and exotic may not get very much money now, where maybe 5 years ago would have gotten a lot more money.
So do you see this going into some of the new LCS types of ships, or where do you think that type of gun might?
The laser weapon, interestingly enough, is designed to supplement or complement the current close-in defense weapon, which is the close-in weapons system, or CWIS, which is basically a Gatling gun, a rotary fired 20 millimeter cannon, which is on board all of our warships, and the LCS is so equipped. It is possible, if this short-range laser is successful and proves to be operationally valuable. The first one, by the way, is being deployed in the Persian Gulf as we speak in a sort of test run. If it proves itself out, then over time, the LCS might be armed with this weapon as opposed to the CWIS, or more conventional, if you will, rotary cannon weapon.
So what's the distance when you're talking about distance?
Range, the
range.
effectiveness. We're talking about really measuring it in no more than 5 miles, probably, standoff. Because these, again, are designed to shoot down weapons that have come quite close to threatening an individual warship.
Okay, so that's quite a distance. That's going to be, I would think, kind of challenging, because the beam has to
Be stable.
Be stable.
And in the Persian Gulf, as you well know, you have high humidity. So again, this will be one of the practical operational issues about how well does this work in a real world operational environment. And that's been one of the downfalls of some of the very long range laser weapons, is operating inside the atmosphere, is atmospheric distortion. That's what drove the Air Force, sensibly, to put its laser, if you will, weapon on board an aircraft that basically overflies the weather.
Right.
But that was a chemically driven laser, and one of the problems it had was you can carry almost so much chemical fuel to fire the laser.
Right. So
you had this sort of the same limitation of you only had so many rounds, if you will, to shoot. And one of the problems with the big 747 concept, it carried a very limited number of shots. And so then that raised questions about how many of these aircraft would you really need to have a militarily, effective capability.
Do you think that type of weapon could be used in space in the sense of maybe downing some threatening satellite? Is that realistic?
Oh, this is the old Star Wars thing. My view about all of this is that the most sensible thing for us to do is not to imagine we're going to have, if you will, space war or self-defense capacities for our satellites, but figure out ways in which our military can operate in an environment where those satellite arrays that we are dependent upon, we can do without them, or operate in an environment where they've been badly degraded, either by electronic warfare, war through cyberspace, or somebody else, as they say, damaging or destroying them in space.
So from your professional perspective, I mean, is this a realistic thing, or this is kind of like futuristic? I mean, does it make any sense to you, just from your research in this area and your professional opinion?
I think the naval plan, especially the short-end laser, I think this is again going to be one of those proof in the pudding is in the eating. That is. And it's not super ambitious in the sense of what it's being asked to do. It has a very well-defined mission that is immediate protection of a warship from these various threats. And it's probably feasible. Electromagnetic gun, I think that's a bigger and more speculative effort as to whether you can get a gun that can shoot multiple shots and won't have major power and cooling problems even for a large warship.
So again, there's such a great connection between the United States Department of Defense and NATO. So do you see this being put on one of the NATO ships over at Norfolk, for example? This type of weapon. Say if the Persian Gulf test proves good, do you see that eventually they might put that on a?
Well, I could imagine if it proves to be very successful and provides a materially better self-defense capability than the current generation of short-range anti-aircraft weapons. That what we're talking about here is a global marketing opportunity. And then the question is, how rapidly will NATO European navies acquire this technology? And the reality is that most of those navies are under extreme budgetary stress. So my suspicion is, even if it looks like a dramatic improvement, you won't see them showing up on, let's say, the Royal Navy or the French Navy quickly.
Right. So what about adversaries? Do you think they might be sitting in their R&D working on something like this? Because everybody is amazed how fast our adversaries are getting countermeasures or getting similar types of weapons. Do you think that this type of technology, we might find it in our future potential adversaries?
Well, yes. I mean, the logical place would be, will the People's Liberation Navy acquire this weapon for the same reasons our Navy is, because they're now building a number of very high-value ships like their first aircraft carrier, and they have the same military problem that we will face, not just from U.S. forces, but, for example, the Japanese or the South Koreans or the Taiwanese will have an increasingly sophisticated array of anti-ship weapons, anti-ship guided missiles, and so therefore they have the same military motivation to develop these kinds of short-range weapons. Whether they have bigger ambitions like the old Star Wars to build very high-powered laser or other electromagnetic weapons that could be used, for example, as an ASAT weapon, etc., we'll see.